Okay, welcome to PRS in Conversation. It's a late night in Izmir, and I'm thrilled to be joined and talking with our Philosophical Research Society artist in residence, Mandy Kahn. It's the first one of 2021, so thank you for taking a few minutes to start this new year for us at PRS in Conversation. I know you're very, very busy with all the stuff you do for PRS and your own writing, so I appreciate it. But and so welcome. You look like you have the nice LA sun there, where it's near midnight in Izmir, Turkey.
Exactly. It's middle of the day here.
Yeah, and we're almost the same. We're almost as far away as you could get here, but we're 11 hours different, so that's kind of exciting. But thanks again for taking some time. And if you are new to the channel, please remember at some point during the conversation to subscribe. It, of course, helps our channel and helps PRS. And you can go to prs.org to get updated on all the events and the classes at the Philosophical Research Society. Of course, you can go on to the bookstore, which I'm always excited to look at, especially since they added used books. And you can even make a donation, which, of course, helps us greatly. It's difficult times for a lot of people, but of course, without having the events we usually have, it's difficult for us as well. So if you could make a donation, that of course would be great. And as I mentioned, excited. I feel really feel personally honored because, and I think a little blessed because I know peace is on everyone's mind right now. Whether peace in the political realm, the biological realm with the pandemic, the upheaval it's caused in our life, personal worries. So personally, this is thrilling for me, Mandy. So thank you again for taking some time to talk with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, as someone who's a thinker and a philosopher beyond just a poet about peace, it's almost like at the moment, it seems like you have a lot of job security because peace seems to be hard. It seems to be hard to find, but much on everyone's mind right now. So I'm really excited we can talk a little bit about your work in the larger sense, not just as a poet, but as a thinker, an activist, and an inspiration. But just to introduce you, for those of you who may not know Mandy Kahn, who is the artist in residence at Philosophical Research Society. Mandy Kahn is an LA-based poet whose work focuses on spirituality, nature, and the arrival of a peaceful humanity. She is the author of 2 collections of poems, Glenn Gould's Chair and Math, Heaven, Time. That's a wonderful title, by the way. Both from London-based poetry press iWare. Her work has been included in the Best American Poetry Anthology series and in former poet laureate Ted Koozer's, hopefully I didn't mess up his name, syndicated column, American Life in Poetry. In addition to writing books, Mandy regularly presents immersive poems, live works of literature that incorporate performances, audience participation, and musical technique. In 2019, Mandy presented a program of immersive and interactive poems at the Getty Center. Her Getty presentation was called Gateways to Peace and was performed by a cast of 7 actors and 3 opera singers. And from what I'm not mistaken when I say this, Mandy, that a lot of the immersive events you held at PRS over the years, they're on the YouTube channel, right? If some of them, because I know you used to do that.
Not yet,
Okay.
but
Okay.
but they're forthcoming.
Okay, good.
They're forthcoming. There's a documentary that's coming out in May, and it documents.
Okay.
It documents all that work.
Yeah, I think it was just like wishful thinking from my unconscious because I know I would the last couple of years before we went into where we are now and got kind of all exiled from the space at PRS. I always saw them coming up like every couple of weeks that you would do them there and from the event calendar. So I think it was just channeling wishful thinking. Anyways, Mandy has given readings at Cambridge University, the London Review Bookshop, and Shoreditch House in the UK, at Motto in Berlin, at Colette in Paris, at Davies Symphony Hall in San Francisco and the New School in New York, and at many venues, of course, in Southern California. And as I mentioned, we're honored and thrilled that Mandy is the artist in residence at the Philosophical Research Society, a Center for Spiritual Discourse founded in 1934, of course, by wisdom scholar Manly P. Hall. Mandy teaches an amazing course. It's a weekly class on peace at PRS. We're going to talk about that a lot, I think, and it's gone online, which is very exciting for the first time in response to this kind of exile we all feel from the place of PRS. So it'll be exciting to hear about that and some of those videos that accompany the class. I know the class is more immersive and discussion-based, but some of those videos are on YouTube, which I highly recommend. They're very evocative and inspiring. And so you had mentioned you have this documentary coming out in May, which is called Peace, the Immersive Poems of Mandy Kahn. So that's exciting. And I feel like we could just talk about anything for very easily for an hour, but we'll try to keep things moving along. And we definitely want to talk about your thinking and your writing and your kind of transformational understanding of peace in your work and in your life, and also the peace class, which I guess we could say right away it's still ongoing, correct? Like someone could jump on Tuesday, they can sign up on the mailing list. Is that how it works?
Exactly. So Peace Class is free. It takes place every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific time, but it's Zoom based, and we have people who tune in from all over the world.
Yeah.
And everyone is welcome. You just sign up at prs.org/events. And if you feel shy about coming, you're welcome to keep your camera off and just observe and participate as you'd like. And you're also welcome to have your camera on. There are interactive parts of it.
Wow.
Essentially, it's the sort of two center parts of the class are a group meditation, which is brief, 2 or 3 minutes. We do a group peace meditation, and by coming together to do a peace meditation, we increase the energy of that focusing of peace. When we join together, we increase in power, and so peace is already incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It is many times more powerful than its opposite already. And when we come together with a shared peace intention in this shared space, either in the same room or, over the web in the same space, we yet again increase the power of our peace intention. We build peace at a remarkable rate. So the weekly class is the opportunity for us to do that together with our peace meditation, which again is really brief. It's 2 or 3 minutes, but it's so potent.
Yeah.
And also I give a talk about an aspect of the nature of peace, because I find that it's sort of a two-part thing. There is a general need to better understand the full nature of peace so that we can access it. There are some pretty central confusions about peace that are in sort of like the popular understanding. And when we talk about the true nature of peace, then we allow people to connect with it more easily by sort of understanding really what it is. And then we also do this meditation where we sort of build it too. And then there's another part of the class where we practice a peace building technique every week through a journaling process. And so it's an hour-long class, but my experience is always that it flies by. I can't believe when I look at the clock and it's 6:59 and it feels like it just started.
Well, and it's exciting. I can't wait when we get to talking a little bit more about it, because I think the combination of being a poet and a seeker in finding how we think about peace. I mean, we're going to talk about peace as a state, and it's amazing how you're animating our understanding of the concept through the words we use to either describe or experience the word, the way poets do. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. But before we get there, I just want to pull back a little. If you've seen other episodes, you know that I asked to be indulged with the origin story of how you came in contact with PRS, how your journey to walking up the parking lot to the beautiful space that we miss so much led to then becoming artists in residence, and your many events that you've had on that, because I find they're endlessly fascinating. Plus, I find that I miss the space a lot. It's now about 2 years since I've been, and now even people who live in LA miss the space. So if you wouldn't mind taking us on that little journey about how you discovered and then how you started to contribute. And I know Dr. Sawyer had mentioned that you're single-handedly responsible for a lot of people following your steps to come there and engage in our community. So I know that's appreciated. But how did you discover that? What's your origin story with the beautiful, special place of seeking that is the PRS grounds in LA?
It is unbelievably, overwhelmingly special, which I knew the first moment I stepped onto the grounds. So the story is, I work with composers as well. I work sometimes as an opera librettist, writing the words for new opera, or sometimes I make collaborative work with new music composers where I write a poetry text and then it's set to music, and often we'll perform these works together. So anyway, I had a concert coming up that was being produced by my friend Yael Greenberg, and it was alongside a composer named Jody Landau. And Jody and I were premiering a new collaborative work of poetry and classical music, as well as sort of having a double concert. So the first half of the event, I was premiering many new immersive poems and also reading poems. And then the second half, Jody was essentially giving a concert of his new music works, classical works, and he had an orchestra there and a choir. Wow. And then in the middle, we premiered a new collaborative work we had worked on together. So anyway, my friend Yael, who was producing this event, put together sort of a list of places where this event might take place. And so she set up some meetings between Jody and I and the people running some venues here in Los Angeles to try to find the right home for this event that she was producing. And so I had never been on the PRS grounds before, though I live in the neighborhood and had driven by it. But it's one of those magical places that sort of reveals itself for the seeker at the right moment.
Right.
And so though I had passed it and been curious about it and been in some ways drawn for years, it was not until this perfect moment for me that I had the opportunity to sort of walk in and see what it was. And from the moment that I walked onto the grounds, and especially from the moment I walked into the library, I had an overwhelming feeling of not only, of course, this is the right place for this event that we're building, but this is a right place for me.
Wow.
So in the putting together of that event, and it had all these moving pieces, it was kind of two concerts in one.
Yeah, well, what's fascinating about the stories is the themes that keep reoccurring when I hear them. And one of the ones I find so interesting is how you describe the veil being lifted. You know, maybe you'd gone by this building many times, but at some point it's just there it is. So it's kind of an incredible experience of something else. But then when you are there, you feel at home. It's very interesting. And it happens over and over. I hear that story.
Absolutely. For me, it was an experience of homecoming and then of home staying, in fact.
Right.
When, I loved doing that first concert there, and I hoped to continue to be involved, but then the continued involvement just happened organically, and I'm so grateful for that. PRS is an absolute miracle in my life. And I recognized it as a miracle when I first walked onto the grounds and when I first had the great privilege of presenting that event there. And now it just seems to be the miracle that keeps on giving. So I couldn't be more grateful.
Well, this may be a good place to ask you a question about your approach to poetry as wisdom seeking, because I'm not too far. I'm right in the middle of Hellenic or Asia Minor, the ancient Greece, just across the sea from Athens, where Plato somewhat threw the poets out of his republic. I mean, it's a little overblown, but he put into motion this notion of distrusting the poet. So I'm just curious about your relationship, whether through writing or reading or talking about poetry. How does it connect with seeking for you?
Well, the process for me of writing a poem, a new poem for the first time, I'll describe the process. I go into a very open state, a kind of flow state. And then I feel the poem, the information arrive kind of like as a packet of information. The best metaphor that I have found for the way that it feels for me is that it's like fishing. And my job as a poet is to have the boat and maintain the boat and then get in the boat and oar myself out to the middle of the lake and then take my line and pop my line into the water. It is the state of receptivity that is my part of it. But what I catch on the line is information that comes from somewhere else, my higher knowing. There's something on the line that is more than what I had in my conscious awareness before I started the process. So now I catch this fish. I can perceive it on the line. I can feel that a poem has sort of connected itself to my line. And then I sort of reel it in. And then the process of writing the poem is almost the process of describing the fish that I have caught. And so there has been, so through, I have been a poet my whole life, really since I was very, very young. So, and then over the years, as I became more and more interested in, ever since then, I've had this experience of being very, very interested in how you take the thing that you catch, that comes from your higher knowing or your higher self, this thing that often has a wisdom that you discover by writing it, but it often has a wisdom that you didn't have before the process of beginning the poem.
Wow.
And then you take this wisdom and then you use your technique as a poet to portray it, to paint it in words. Yeah. So I've been very interested my whole life in that process, and just came to understand that in so many ways there was a deep and profound connection there. And so that's how I became a part of the community, and I just kind of continued to be.
Yeah, that's what I find so interesting about your story is this twin element of the kind of veil being lifted of the building, so you actually discover it when you need to, and also the feeling of being at home.
So where was I? Was I in was I still in the boat? Had I caught the fish?
No, you had caught the fish, and you had come back, and you were talking about how you had been a poet pretty much your whole life, as far as you could kind of remember, and you've always been interested in that process of then taking what you caught, to use your metaphor, and I guess sharing the feast.
Oh, well, thank you. I've never thought of it that way. Certainly describing the fish, describing the wisdom that connected to my line or sort of swam into my net through this process of openness, that's been my process, my technique as a poet my whole life. And that my spiritual connection is a similar technique. It is an openness. It is my job, as I see it, to maintain this vehicle, this body, this etheric body that is as connected and as open as possible, and then to sort of put out my net and let what is my higher knowing come into it. And so those processes are, are versions of the same thing. And so in studying poetry writing, at least the way that it felt natural for me to do it, it was simultaneously a learning how to receive higher spiritual knowing from my higher self. So it was always an intuition training. I just wouldn't have described it that way when I was an undergraduate, because I didn't have a full understanding of what it was.
Right.
And it's interesting because now that I write about peace, it's the exact same process. It's simply a receiving of information about the nature of peace and a languaging of it. It's the same thing as writing a poem, except that the process of writing about peace is really, for me, about clarity, because it's important to describe it in a way that makes it as accessible as possible. So I save my flourishes for the poetry, and with the piece work, it's just about making it as clear as I possibly can.
Yeah, and it seems clear. I mean, like I said, we'll talk about it when we get to, I think, some of your thoughts, especially as they're related to your work with peace and the peace class, is this relationship between the language you're using and the language you're kind of applying to thinking about peace that is a creative act. It also is clarifying, but it also is opening new levels of understanding. I found that really fascinating in watching your videos. But I also, before we get into the peace class, I know in your introductory material that I was looking at, you described yourself as profoundly Californian. I love that. I love that because, that is a beautiful. I think that could be a memoir. I mean, you could. I think you should use that title as a memoir someday. Maybe a memoir poem, but profoundly Californian, because it can apply to a lot of different levels. But so I was going to ask you. As you know, LA is a city that draws people from around the world. I lived there for 2 decades at least, and was more often to meet someone from somewhere else who had come there. And not as many people like yourself who've grown up, especially in Los Angeles. So, because you're a poet, because you're a thinker, an artist, I wanted your thoughts on how maybe LA reflected your work in relation to the 2 dominant narratives that are in culture. They're not the only narratives, but they do tend to be the dominant ones that are kind of told about LA. One being or Southern California being the kind of land of plenty. The place of almost idyllic opportunity. And then the other one of it being like a Babylon apocalypse, where it's doomed. You have these 2 competing dominant narratives in movies and books and in stories. And it also relates in the similar concept of as above, so below. It also relates to kind of 2 stories we have individually about LA, which is the place to come and find opportunity and reinvent yourself and become quote unquote anything. But also its shadow, which was more like the place to get lost and lives get destroyed and you get lost in this, dystopia. So I just thought in growing up, what was your, how did LA affect your work, whether interacting with these dominant narratives that are being told about LA or in your own, or just in any way, how I think growing up has made you the poet you are or the thinker you are? Because I know having PRS in LA is not an accident. It's not a coincidence.
LA is a very, very, very special place. I truly believe it is a vortex, a place of arrival on this planet. It is a place where new ideas, fresh ideas, essentially whirl up into consciousness. There are many places that are vortexes on this planet, but what's unusual about Los Angeles is that it is this powerful creative vortex, and also new thinking vortex, new idea vortex, that also happens to be walking distance from the mechanics of dissemination of ideas. And there's nothing else like that on the planet. There are very powerful places. Every summer, I spend a lot of time on the top of Mount Shasta in at the northern part of California, a powerful vortex and place of arrival, Sedona, Arizona. There are places like this all over the planet, but you can't walk down off Mount Shasta and be on a movie studio lot or go record an album. Only LA has this incredible proximity between that powerful place of arrival and that powerful place of dissemination. Didn't understand any of that when I was growing up, but now as an adult, I understand. And when I talk about being profoundly Californian, well, first of all, I grew up here, and I also went to college in California as well, and then moved back down to Southern California. So I really have lived here almost all my life. But people moved west for freedom, and for creative freedom, and for mental freedom, and freedom of thought, and freedom of practice. The East represented what was expected and following the pattern and fitting in, and the West represented what was wild and what was available and what was creatively available and what was available in practice, how we could live our lives. You could go west where someone wasn't looking over your shoulder waiting to see if you were doing the conventional thing, and you could live your way. And so that's my California. My California is a place in which I choose to focus my time and attention on what matters to me. And often what I do with my time and my focus and my consciousness is unconventional. But I'm grateful to be able to spend time doing what matters to me, and not feeling like I am expected to do what is required of everyone. So, I mean, one thing that I think about a lot as a woman is how grateful I am to have been born in this moment, because we all have different paths to walk. I knew almost from birth that I had a lot of things to do in this life, and that being a mother just wasn't one of them. And I was I essentially was born knowing that, even as a little kid, looking around at other little kids and talking about growing up and being parents. Even as a little kid, I was like, I don't think I'm going to do that. I don't think that's part of what I'm going to do. But if it were a few generations ago, I would have felt incredible social pressure to mother. And I feel so grateful that I was able to walk to the beat of my own drum and express the choice that was always right for me and has always been right for me, which is focusing on these projects that I feel so called to mother, but not a person, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you really hit on a narrative. Dr. Heller, who had lectured for decades at PRS and is doing so again and knew Manly Hall really well. He talked about LA as the new Alexandria. And it's this kind of, third narrative that's not known to as many people. It's not commodified in the cultural narrative industry that we see as the other two I talked about. But when you're there, it's present. And it's this, I love the word that you used of vortex, and the fact that it's international as well. So it's it's pulling in like a whirlpool of people from all over the world, and you can, think and do and read things. This wonderful openness. It was beautifully described. So thank you for that. But I think we can talk about. I guess the last question I had about your poetry, and this moves us into the peace class, is I was wondering which came first, the piece or the poetry? Or the piece? Yeah, yeah. Or were they always together, or maybe you didn't know about one, or what?
In the poetry came first. I was almost as soon as I could speak, I was speaking in verse. My grandmother took care of me quite a bit when I was very young. So it was my grandmother who would pick me up from preschool and take care of me every day in the afternoons. And she, raised me, I guess, grandparented me the way that she had, I guess, raised her children 40 years before my arrival. So I had a very old-fashioned experience. And so I was raised on, read to all day, all afternoon. And it was always rhymed verse, A. Milne, and, the sort of 19th century and very early 20th century rhymed children's verse. And I was hearing that, a huge amount of that. And so it was very, very natural to me that when I started speaking, and speaking in sentences and speaking in paragraphs, that the natural cadence of traditional verse was already so deeply in me. Anyway, so poetry came first. I remember when I've always had an inherent love of peace, but I never expected speaking about peace to be a part of a public facing aspect of my life. I thought of my love of peace as being private, as it always has been. I had, when I was in, I think, 4th grade, is the first time that I had this incredible experience where my camp counselor was wearing a peace sign, and I was transfixed by it. And I asked her what it was, and I asked her to tell me about peace. And, there was a true experience of falling in love with. And that year, when I was in 5th grade, we got to choose a subject in which to do this huge project that we were going to work on for the whole year. And so we went up to the teacher and we would sort of pitch our project. And I said, I want to do a project on peace. And my teacher said, okay, well, peace and what? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, you can't do a whole project.
What about peace? What about?
Yeah, what about peace? It has to be peace and something. Yeah. So how about you do your project on war and peace? And I was like, war and peace? And he's like, yeah, well, peace itself isn't a subject matter. That's not a topic. There's nothing to talk about. There's nothing there. So you'll do war and peace. So basically, then I spend my whole 5th grade researching ceasefires.
Yeah, war.
Yeah, basically, how did so it ended up being a history. Then the Treaty of Versailles, and it was negotiated between this person and that person.
Well,
we'll say that again because I love that.
Yeah, well, welcome back. We're having some, the archons, the internet archons are acting up. So we're back, and you were talking about the 5th grade teacher who had said peace. Well, that's not a subject. There's nothing there, and it just occurred to me. I know we'll talk about it later, but it seems like even today, in the work I've watched in your peace class, you're still talking to that guy, that voice. Who's saying that peace is not a state, it only is in opposition to war and all this, and so much of your work, which we'll talk about in a second, because I want to get to the end of your story on this 5th grade, endeavor of discovering what peace is and is not. But it just struck me as you were telling that story about how you're still talking to that state of mind, that understanding.
these are our great teachers. These are our great masters. They incarnate to say the important things to us.
Right.
Peace, I had to spend my whole life creating a counter argument
Right.
to what he said to me. Peace, there's nothing to talk about. It's just a vacuous state that sometimes you experience and sometimes you can't do a project on that. Well, it's taken my whole adult life to be able to make a counter argument to that. And so I stopped. So anyway, I got stuck with this year-long class essentially about war, about
Right.
ceasefires.
Right.
But my true love of peace, true peace, lasting peace, the idea of lasting peace and the idea of being able to evolve into a human collective that experiences lasting peace, that never left me. I've always had a profound love of that and a profound belief that that is possible, and not just possible, a part of our evolution as a species. Always known that, always felt that. And it wasn't until really the end of 2018. So
Wow.
by then, I know it's crazy. You and I are speaking in February of 2021, so relatively very recently. So I'm years into my career as a poet.
Right.
I am so grateful to be doing what I love and I figured that's it. The whole rest of my life, I'll write books of poems and read poems if it's possible for me to do that. I've stumbled upon what I love, and that's a whole lifetime of doing, really. And then it was in 2018 that I'm a mystic and I'm an intuitive, and I essentially received this, you could say, cosmic assignment. It's a little challenging to describe what it feels like, except that I already described what it's like to receive a poem.
Right.
It's sort of like that to receive any information for me, sort of from my higher self. It's just I make myself very open and available, and then I have this relationship with it, and it's a sense of knowing what I've essentially received. And so out of nowhere, I sort of received this calling to start speaking about peace and the nature of peace. Well, so I started braiding in a little bit of speaking about the nature of peace at events that I was already scheduled to read at as a poet, except the hosts had no idea that between poems, I was also going to talk a little bit about the true nature of peace. But kindly, they tolerated it. And so I did that for a while until it became clear that this information about the nature of peace and the project of helping aspects of the nature of peace to be better understood so they could be better utilized, that was, it needed more space than just the sort of a few minutes between poems at events that I was already scheduled to be at as a poet. And so that's when, and talk about PRS and talk about miracles. So I had already been asked by the Philosophical Research Society to begin as its artist in residence. And that was beginning, I think, in May or June of 2019. And so I sort of said, well, I have this, I've received this invitation to start speaking about the nature of peace. So maybe, even though I was brought on, as the artist in residence, essentially imagining that it would all be poetry that I'd be sharing here, I'll do a live event series where I premiere new immersive poems, but essentially I'll talk about the nature of peace between every other thing that happens. So over the course of the night, you're also essentially getting an elucidation of an aspect of peace's nature. So it's a little bit of information about peace, some poems, some classical music. So that event series started in 2019. It's called I Like Peace. And we were doing them every month until lockdown started. The last one was just a couple of weeks before lockdown in 2020. And so the peace information really found a home in these live concerts. And then when lockdown happened, of course, we were not able to do those concerts
Right.
anymore, but the
Right.
peace information started to arrive, in my experience, 20 times as quickly. And
Wow.
so the way that I spent the first chunk of lockdown in 2020 was writing a book about the nature of peace. It was just arriving and arriving and arriving at this incredible rate. And so yeah, that was how I spent the first part of lockdown. And I essentially, peace class, again, as an intuitive, this stuff just sort of arrives, and I was shown that essentially there was a way to start sharing this information about the nature of peace, and also really specifically clarifying a few things about peace and peace's nature, clarifying some pretty common misunderstandings. Central to that is really making it clear that peace and freedom are partners, and that which is peace, that which is true peace, must be chosen by the individual and cannot be enforced.
Right.
And that when we truly understand that, when we step into a place of the honoring of the free will of all and understanding the connection between peace and the honoring of all, we have the opportunity to really engage with peace. So that's sort of central to it. But
yeah, and I think one of the thing that's very profound in hearing you tell your story is you had this whole basically a career, if not a life, because it went back to when you were 3, 5 years old, or when listening to your grandmother. And I can just imagining you asking for dinner in iambic pentameter when you're like 5 years old. That must have been amazing. But no, so anyway, so you kind of, what's so fascinating to me about your thinking and your work on peace is that sensitivity to language, that clarity that poets develop, that being sensitized to creating with language and how to make people aware of words. That's all being utilized now as you think about and talk about peace. So, in one of your talks, you recently were talking beautifully about, peace is not thought of as a state, but you talk about how peace is a state, and not just state of mind or state of meaning, but a state. And it's a source. And it's the most valuable resource on the planet. These are ways that people haven't really thought about peace, but you needed the language to help create that space for understanding. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that. I just thought it was very profound. I just stopped and I think you said peace is the greatest untapped resource on the planet. And in this discourse of everyone's grown up with resource usage and climate change and resource, depreciation, and that's not out there. I thought it was very profound, that peace and how you're talking about the understanding of it as a state. And I believe you called it the state from which all creative and things can come from as well. That's the greatest untapped resource. And it was very illuminating for me, but I think it could have only come from you, but also your history and dedication to language via poetry. I don't know where I'm going, but that's it.
Well, thank you. So essentially, what I have been shown is that peace is both the state that we experience subjectively, like a feeling. Oh, I feel peaceful now. Oh, now I feel, lacking in peace. It's sort of a state that we move in and out of experience of. But whether or not we are experiencing it subjectively, objectively, it is also a substance. Right. And it is a substance that exists whether or not we're having a subjective experience of it or not. It's both a substance and a state. And we haven't understood that as a, or I should say most of us haven't understood that. There have always been people who have understood peace. Historically, there have been very few of them, and they have tended to live apart from society. So this profound, true, and full understanding of peace has always been represented, but certainly in this time is not represented as the common belief.
Right.
And so what would happen if most people really understood the true nature of peace and thereby had the opportunity, if they chose, or to choose to plug into it, to essentially utilize it. So the substance of peace, is the best way to describe it would be to say it's synonymous with empty space, because it is the great knowledge of peace is available in empty space. So empty space and the substance of peace are in many ways the same thing. The substance of peace, which is you could say empty space. Another way to say it would be openness or availability,
Right.
is dominant. It's dominant in the body, because if you go on the micro level of anything, if you go closer and closer and closer and closer, what's between the atoms? What's between the electrons? It's always empty space. It's always that openness, that availability.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
empty space is dominant. Peace is dominant. It's dominant in the body. It's dominant in everything. And it's very obviously dominant in the universe. Gaze up at the night sky. It's wonderful that there are shining lights in it, but there's a lot more of the empty space around it than there are things. So peace is by far dominant. So there's just more of it anyway. So not only is there just more of it, but it is also more powerful than the other thing. And by powerful, I mean affects its environment more profoundly. It self-builds, it self-generates. So it's not only is there more of it, but it naturally proliferates as well. And so it's peace ultimately always, I don't want to say wins, because that's sort of borrowing the language of dichotomy, but that's the direction that everything evolves towards always, whether we are steering our car in that direction or just hands off the wheel and waiting to see where the car goes. That's always the direction of evolution. What is human evolution? It is becoming more loving in increments. It is becoming more ourselves in increments. That's what evolution is. And all human evolution is always that eventually. I add the word eventually because the way we've been doing it is the slowest possible way. I mean, slow. Now, the difference between us and peace is that peace is the most patient thing in the universe, because peace understands all evolution is towards peace, and peace has got the time, and peace has got the patience, and peace has got the openness, and peace has got the non-attachment. So peace understands we can do it the slow way. We can stay in the terrible twos of our development for millions of years, because we're eventually going to evolve to the next stage, because we are evolving beings. Everything evolves. It's the law of the universe. Nothing is fixed. There's nothing stationary in us. It's all moving energy. It's all vibration. It's all evolution. So whether or not we are doing it intentionally, we are always evolving. All evolution is towards peace. And peace is the honoring of all. It's the ultimate holding space for it. It understands that we are getting there in our own way, in our own time. The reason I feel called to talk about aspects of peace is because we as a humanity don't need to stay on the slowest possible train. We can evolve more efficiently and more quickly into a community that is loving, into a community that honors all people and honors the land and honors the freedom of all. And, these are the characteristics of peaceful societies, and also everyone's basic needs are met, because in a more evolved society, a more loving society, there is the mind of oneness. And so there's not what we, there's not this sort of separation or hoarding or whatever. It's
Right.
just this beautiful flow that is connected to. And um, we're so close to that next step of evolution, which leads to the next, which leads to the next, which it's like we are on the slowest possible train, but the speed train is right there.
Yeah.
Doors are open. And by the way, it's free.
Yeah.
See, when I talk about peace being this incredible untapped resource, I always like to mention that it's free, because it's free, not it's dominant. The way that we connect to it, there are lots of ways, and part of why Peace Class, I do it every week. This week will be the 20th, but I will probably teach it, forever, because there's so much, there's so much to teach about it. But anyway, it's free to connect to.
Yeah.
It's free to build. Whereas keeping ourselves in this system, the cycle of belligerence, is very expensive, right? Look at all these things that we have to build, and all the money we have to put into it, and all the money we have to put into keeping people to sort of see things in this way that keeps us in this sort of like in this cycle of belligerence. It's costly, it's hard to keep people from their true nature being loving and peaceful. It's expensive, but peace is free, and it's right there.
Yeah.
So
I love that. I love the image of being on the train platform, because it's like if you've been to the European train stations when there's tracks all over and you're looking at the wrong train, and someone says, "No, you're behind you is the express train." And that's but what happened. As a Gnostic, I think about the archons, but I'm just thinking about your opinion. What happened to? Because it's very interesting how you talked about when someone says peace, the mind conjures war. So what happened in this co-opting, or there's so many phrases like peace of mind, rest in peace, and these are all, important as we navigate our lives. But what you're getting at is not, these things don't reflect that notion that peace is a state, immediate state that is available to us, that we can participate in. It's experiential, right? So there's almost this dilution of the word peace to keep us from turning around and seeing the express train. I don't know if you've thought about it like that. It just occurred to me. But you're the master linguist, so.
Absolutely. Well, so they're central. I think the reason that I have this project is because central is a language confusion, a language problem with peace. And it's based in the fact that we've got this one word, peace, that means two very different things. It means a ceasefire, which is to end a belligerent outbreak, or the end of a belligerent outbreak, and the peace state. And the peace state is a state in which a belligerent outbreak does not begin. Yeah. So we have this one word that means to end a belligerent outbreak, and a state in which a belligerent outbreak does not begin. Ceasefire and true peace cannot even exist in the same system. They're part of two very different systems. So it is a confusion of language to say, oh, well, peace is a ceasefire. Well, they're part of two different systems. So when for those of us who love peace, and I am among them, a ceasefire is a much more comfortable station in the cycle of belligerence. And so it is natural to want to create a ceasefire, because it's so much more comfortable for those of us who love peace to not watch violence. However, it is useful for those of us who love peace to really understand that a peacefire is always temporary. It's always a part of this cycle of belligerence. Those of us who love peace can still spend our time building ceasefires, but
Right.
Essentially,
Right.
what we can also do is we can use our love of peace to build a system that is truly peaceful, where peace is lasting. And that is about building building a more peaceful individual consciousness and thereby gifting a more peaceful individual consciousness to the collective. That's how we evolve. We essentially heal this belligerent cycle, and then we can turn the page. Generally, as a humanity, turn the page. So we
Right.
can either invest in the cycle of belligerence, making it a little bit better because there isn't fighting that is happening right now in this place. So I feel better in this moment, but it'll
Right.
probably pop up here again at some point, or maybe it's going to pop up somewhere else because there's still, when I tamp down this moment of belligerence, it'll pop up somewhere else if these people are made to feel like their freedom is not being respected. Then I'm creating resentment, and that's going to boil up, and it's going to be anger, and
Right.
it's going to be part of the cycle. However, if I use my individual consciousness to create more individual peace and thereby more collective peace, we're healing that whole cycle. We're creating something brand new, and that is a truly peaceful society.
Right. It seems to me that focusing just on the ceasefire slash war notion that you're talking about, that level, is it's a distraction from the larger notions of peace you're talking about. In the same way that when we talk about, okay, I have peace of mind, right? And so it tends to conjure up peace as inactivity or calmness and a kind of a lack. But the way you write about peace or think about peace is that is the place of creativity and potentiality and newness and transformation of consciousness. So in the same way, we're by just using the term, oh, my mind's at peace. It's kind of like it's the opposite of what you're talking about, which can be very powerful in raising a conscious and participating in the availability of this peace space that you're talking about. So it's just funny how these common dominant language phrases or representations of a worldview are kind of pulling us from looking at the express train, as you called it, or looking at the greater reality that is the peace state that you plug into. That
peace is pure power. And when we connect with the peace mind, the peace state, it empowers all that we do.
Right.
Now, that power cannot be misappropriated. You can't take the energy source of peace and then run it through a machinery that is going to perform the opposite of peace. I like to compare it to electricity, because electricity is a power source that, or a power that you can use to put into a machine that's going to calm a baby, or you can put it into a machine that's going to do something not peaceful.
Right.
So you can use electricity however you want. Well, peace is not that way. Peace is, you could call it a fractal, in that peace is itself at every magnitude. So a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of peace, an enormous amount of peace, it's all self-same. It's the same. And so you cannot take a piece of peace and break it off and kind of change it and then use it to power your machine that's going to do something that is not loving. Peace is only loving and always loving in every situation. Peace always honors all and honors the free will of all, always, in every situation. It's universal law. It's standard. That's simply the nature of peace. So you've got this free and available power source that can be equally plugged into by anyone. And then you have the powers that be that want to keep things the same. How do you keep this free power source from being plugged into by everyone. Well, you confuse people about what
Right.
it is. And
Yes.
so one of these popular confusions is this idea that peace is wimpy, peace
Yeah.
is weak, you know.
Pieces
Either
or
you're
pieces.
active,
Yeah. Pieces
yeah, either you're
lacking.
active for
Yeah.
building, yeah,
It's a
it's
lack.
complacency. It's
Right.
complacency.
Right.
Either you're active in building a world that is peaceful or that is whatever, or you're just complacent and you're over there, you know, meditating and you're not really, you know, it doesn't really bother you anymore. And so you don't care about other people.
Right.
Well, that's a pretty good way to distract people so that they're not participating in the evolution of this cycle of belligerence into a cycle of that which is honoring. You know, I honor all. Well, first of all, I learned this from peace. Peace is an honoring of all,
Yep.
everyone at every place in their evolutionary process. So simultaneously, as I honor all, I honor all of those who love ceasefires and spend their lives building ceasefires.
Right.
I do the same because I love ceasefires too, because
Right.
I don't want to be around violence either, or even know it's happening anywhere on this planet, because I want everyone to be comfortable and, you know, all of that. So I too love ceasefires and work for them,
Of
but we
course.
don't have to choose. What's so important to understand is we don't have to choose between building a world that is permanently honoring all, not just kind of in this moment until another outbreak happens, but is forever loving, a world in which everyone honors the earth, not because you should, but because they absolutely have an innate knowing that the earth is worthy of honoring. People who are kind to each other, not because they should and they'll get in trouble if they aren't, but because
Right.
they remember that every person is worthy of honoring, and it's inherent. These things are inherent. When societies evolve a few generations later, it's almost like the teaching doesn't even have to happen because our knowing is so inherent. Our body, our physiology, our human embodied physiology connects with our higher knowing, our higher physiology. That's what's so amazing about the human body. We've got the human body, we have the etheric body, we have the soul in the body, we have the higher knowing. So depending on how evolved we are, we're more or less able to access our higher knowing, which is loving and peaceful. And as we evolve a little bit more, we have more joining with our higher knowing. And so less separation, less the experience
Right.
of you have to be taught by your teacher that you are nice, and so you are nice. You just understand, you remember that you are worthy of honoring because the
Yes.
self-honoring, self-love part of it is central. And that person is, and that person is, and everybody is, and there's enough love for everyone. And love is not this sort of, you know, limited resource where you can give
Right.
to that
Right.
person, but not that person because then you're going to run out. No,
Right.
no,
Right. Right.
it's just a
Right.
flow, and there's enough for everybody, and there's enough for
Yeah.
you, and there's enough for them. And, you know, we are in the slow part of evolution where we sort of are learning these things piecemeal, but what we build of our own learning and what we build in our own peacefulness and therefore contribute to the collective now is building a more loving and peaceful future in which these things will become standard. We will become more connected to our higher knowing. So what we experience right now is this sort of, you know, part of what's so challenging about being here in this historical moment in this society is that we are taught certain things about our human nature that are not accurate. It's just that we are part of an evolutionary cycle, and we're in, just like a baby evolves to be 2 years old. And when a baby is 2 years old, they throw tantrums and they're frustrated and they pound their fists on the ground, and that's how they act. But then next thing you know, they're 3, and then they're 5, and they're 8, and they use their words, and they make friends, and they build community. It's a point in evolution that we honor. We love and honor because we understand that it's part of the growth, and the growth always leads to wisdom. The 2-year-old does not embody the wisdom or experience the wisdom of the 80-year-old, but is working towards it, and we honor every step in that evolution. It's so it is only a temporary part of our human experience as a collective to go through our terrible twos, which is this sort of like belligerence, and I pick up a club and I hit you with the club, and then that is a part of a very temporary part of our evolution towards what is more loving and more peaceful. It's just that as a society, we've been caught in this perpetual terrible twos. And then we look back at our own history and say, well, that's just who we are. We are 2-year-olds, and that's what we do. We throw these fits and we pound our fists on the ground when we didn't win the game. And it's like, well, no, that's a very brief moment in evolution that we evolved through. If we look back at how we acted yesterday and say, well, that must be how we are always, we're missing the boat. The way that we are always is that we are loving and peaceful, and we are always evolving towards remembering more and more and more of that.
Yeah, and I think it was Freud who said a 2-year-old would destroy the world if he could.
I don't know that quote, but that's hilarious.
Like throwing it on the ground.
Well, here we are in this long-standing, terrible twohood that we are so close to stepping out of. And stepping past.
And as you wonderfully describe, we can experience. And I think this is where it connects to you talked about your mysticism and your approach to poetry, where it seems like it's a state available, maybe not to live in forever, but to connect with, understand, share. It's very inspiring. And so I'm curious, what has been I'll just give you a few minutes before we go to just talk a little bit about maybe what's been the most interesting surprise or the most fulfilling aspect of moving this class online, because as you said, you've done it for 20 weeks now, but you did so much of it in person. And I'm wondering, because we are kind of trapped in this screen world. I'm loving this conversation, but it's still being mediated, but thank God we could have it. So there's this relationship between being in it's somehow cut off from each other because of technology and what's going on at the moment, but also being able to connect with each other through technology. So I'm curious about someone who, I'm sure with the immersive poetry and the music and the space you're creating physically when you're doing your immersive talks at PRS, I'm just curious about now as you're 20 or so classes in. 20 is amazing, by the way. Thank you for that. I hope it goes on for forever as well. I just want to give you a few minutes to reflect on that journey, what's been surprising, what's been, I guess, fulfilling. Give you any space to talk about that, because it's pretty amazing that you're now in this new medium for 20 weeks and doing what you were doing in the confines and the beautiful confines of the PRS physical space.
So often in our own personal evolution, the way that we are, sometimes we get a little bit of a kick in the pants, which is we're in our comfort zone and there's the thing that feels good to us because we've been doing it for a while, and then that stops working, that goes away. And then we are required in our own evolution to become vulnerable, to develop a new skill set. And then there is growth there. And that very much happened to me. I love the in-person space. I am a very sensitive person, so I can feel the energy in a room. So I love bringing a group of people together where we're in one room, and in which in that room I can talk about peace or read a poem or do an immersive work. And I can essentially be working in concert with the energies of the room and the energy of the collective. As a very sensitive person, I love that. And by the way, that is very vulnerable for me too. I had to learn how to evolve into being okay with being vulnerable in person with people. And even that in the beginning was a stretch, and it was like jumping into a cold pool, but I just did it because I, again, like all of this, I was called to it, and it sounded scary, but I am able to perceive what my callings are. And often they are scary in the beginning, and then I get used to it, and then I get comfortable. And that's usually when I am called to evolve a little bit more. And so I was comfortable with these in-person events, and I still love them so much. And if I had everything to choose from, I would choose that. But anyway, it went away, and then I was called to explore connection and community building at a distance by way of technology. And the way that it happened was I was sort of encouraged, intuitively as encouraged to start exploring that. And I felt open to it and nervous and vulnerable and all the stuff that you feel when you're at the edge of your own personal expansion and evolution. And then my birthday happened in May of 2020. And so it's May of 2020. We've been in lockdown for a few months. I wasn't able to gather with my friends in person for my birthday. And so I said, you know what I'll do? I'll do a Zoom birthday, but I'm going to create an interactive event, or an interactive game, almost like a scavenger hunt that people can do in their homes.
Wow.
I'll have like 20 friends together for my birthday, and I'm going to create this whole game, and, we'll do my birthday party that way. And so I did it with about 20 friends, and I realized about 2/3 through, and I was just having the most fun. I was like a scavenger hunt. I would say to my friends, okay, so, and I broke them into teams, and I said, okay, this team and this team, somebody has to go grab whatever from your house, and whatever, somebody gets one first, then you get the point. Anyway, right. So I'm watching my friends run from the screen into their house to get whatever I told them to get, a mug with the name of a city on it or whatever, right. And run back to get the points for their team. And I realized, boop, this is what I had been intuitively encouraged to start developing in terms of community building, and that sense of building what is loving at a distance by way of technology. I had just accidentally, but not really, because it was also intuition to create this scavenger hunt game for my birthday Zoom. I realized, oh, okay, this is what Peace Class is. It is using the technology that exists to create a collective space and it's me learning how to I want to say read the room or feel the room, be interactive with what is there at a distance. I need to learn how to evolve so that what I do can find a home in a distanced world, because who knows how long we're going to be distanced. And I was sort of shown by way of this game. Of course, it always happens, right? When we're like, oh, this is just fun with my friends. And then you realize, boop, no, actually, that was training, and now you're trained. So essentially, that's what happened. After that birthday, it was like, okay, so your Peace Class that we've been sending you like intuitive information about, it's like that. It's like that every week. So
nice.
Anyway, I have the first maybe 6 Peace Classes were, I'm so grateful to all who attend Peace Class. And I am especially grateful for those who were there in the beginning, because they really were holding space for me as a facilitator to learn how in the world to teach this information and share this information with this technology at a distance. And I was practicing how to do what I was already doing with a live group of people. And I'm so grateful for those who were so generous to hold space for me while I did that. But I did, as when we do something repeatedly, we learn. Just like when I first started giving live readings as a poet, I learned that when you get up there, you test the microphone and, you know, you put it, and I learned to bring my own little stand that I put my book on, or,
Right.
I learned how you do. And now when I do live events, it's like I've been doing them for so long that I, I don't have any nerves, because it's like, that's what I do. That muscle memory is there. And so with Peace class being every week, it's the opportunity to learn how to create this chalice of connection at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if or when we come back together in person as a community, I hope to go back to doing the live in Los Angeles once a month.
Mm-hmm.
I like peace concerts with classical music and
Right.
interactive and all that stuff, and also to have our weekly peace class at a distance. I mean, one of the great joys of peace class is that we have people who come from other countries,
Exactly.
which never would be possible with live stuff. I'm so honored. There's someone who stays up to come. It's the middle of the night for him. It's like midnight. Well, thank you so much, because this is the middle of the night for you. He stays up, to come to our class at what is midnight or 1 a.m, where he is. And we have people who come in from Australia, people from all over. So it's and also, I think, in terms of the work that we're doing as peace holders together in this class, it is useful. If you can imagine a turning globe, right, and you imagine these little like intentional peace lights, it's useful to be kind of spread around the globe. It's wonderful to have a big burst of 200 people in a room together in Los Angeles, and everybody is focused on peace building in that moment. That's gorgeous. That's wonderful. But isn't it also nice to have a lot of little ones kind of spread around the globe? And I'm sure that's all by design too. It's a big project of peace building, and so why not have both, a burst of it in one location and a little sprinkling of it, all around.
Yeah, you're so good with words. I mean, I guess that's probably a stupid thing to say to a professional poet, but I keep writing down all your phrases. Like peace holders is so beautiful. So such a beautiful evocation of so much of what you're saying. And of course it needs to be global. But yeah, I think as much as I enjoy hearing the origin stories and about the space, about how you came in contact with that space, you mentioned the library, and as much as I miss the being back and think so fondly of all the lectures I attended and the people I met there, I think a greater gift to us now has been to not transplant, but somehow try to expand that into this virtual space, which is what PRS is doing. I mean, with your class, but also with the other classes, that we can look forward to being all back together, but it's better off for the PRS vision to have people who, for distance reasons, economic reasons, just practical reasons, they can't get there. They can't get there to hear the wonderful lecture that Dr. Sawyer does about Kierkegaard in the beautiful auditorium. They just can't do it. So I think it's really been a beautiful expansion of the vision of Manly Hall, but then also what Dr. Sully and all the people at PRS are doing. They were moving toward this trying to make this online space more reflective and representative of what happens in the physical space. So personally, I just admire that you're helping to do that overall as a project, in addition to what you're doing with the peace class itself.
Well, thank you. And Manly P. Hall put together this incredible collection of volumes that is the PRS library, and he made it available for free.
Yep.
And that was important to him. That was an important part of the vision of PRS. And, Manly is an autodidact. He was self-taught. And much of what he learned in public libraries. And when he was researching the secret teachings of all ages, he was doing that research in libraries, and he was getting material for free. And then, ultimately he created this library and he opened it to the public and he said, this is a public resource. Well, Manley passed away in 1990, so he did not live into this age, but I believe it is a continuation of his work to say, this is a resource and this is a free resource, and let's just open it up more and more and more and more and more because the beauty of the PRS library is that it's many volumes, which means many voices and many perspectives from all around the world, open and free. That's what YouTube is. It's many volumes, many voices, many perspectives all around the world. So it makes so much sense that, that this information be available in a way in the universal library, in the shared library, that it is among the offerings and can be chosen. And the reason that it meant so much to me to make the Peace class free, and I'm so grateful to Greg, Kelly, and the whole PRS staff for agreeing to do that, because it is an institution and it does have bills to pay. And when I came in and pitched the class, in the first breath, I said, sorry, guys, it has to be free, because central to the understanding of Peace's nature is that it is free. In contrast to the old system, which is expensive to maintain, the system of belligerence, right? All this arming up, all these, all kinds of costs on all levels. Peace is free. And so that has to be central to the sharing of this information. It always has to be available in a free form. And they said yes. And I'm so grateful. I think it just speaks to the vision of the institution that they were able to say, yeah, we'll do it for free. We'll put our resources into it, and understand the way that flow works, which is when you put things out, there is a flow back in some form. It doesn't have to be, this is the cost of the talk, where you can sort of like follow the flow, like, oh, we gave the information, then you gave the money of the, sometimes flow is more open than that. And that's essentially what we're being evolved into, a situation where it's like you put out and you receive, and you put out and you receive, and it's less tallying and more just a more honestly more divine flow.
Yeah, and I think what I like a lot about your class is that there's information all over of dubious qualities. I mean, we're drowning in information. We could turn ourselves into just information, like just receivers forever, and not kind of experience anything, not engage, not touch, not. And I think what your class is doing is really trying to, of course, it's information, but it's offering engagement and experience in sharing voices, yours, people all around the world, the thinkers you talk about, or the ideas you talk about. And that's different from the passivity of this age of information. And that's what I think is also important to the PRS and the Manly Hall, and how they're developing this platform that's now beyond the space, the physical space, but it's not just about passively receiving. It's about discussion, engagement, dialogue. And so I applaud you, because I know this has been new, and you're pioneering, and there's a lot of classes now that are up, and a lot of different things going on, some short, some long. And so I encourage people to check out the Peace class on PRS.org, but also the many that are coming and going throughout the year. So I know you mentioned May is your birthday, and it did, to go back to the beginning, which is always beautiful to do. You mentioned there's a documentary coming out. You want to say a little bit about that? Because didn't you say you may be out in May, which could be that.
That's
That's a pretty cool birthday present, I think. Pretty cool. But
so.
maybe present's the wrong word. Celebration is probably a better word for
The,
your birthday. Do you want to say a little bit about that and how people can kind of look for it, or where they should find it, or?
so in another PRS miracle. In at the end of 2018, I was invited to be a part of a group show at PRS, and I did a performance. I premiered a new immersive poem that I wrote to be a part of this group show, and about a week before, the PRS said, "Oh, we employed a documentary filmmaker to
Nice.
make a record of this live immersive ephemeral performance, and then we're going to take that record and we're going to show it on a video loop so that people who weren't here, over the next
Nice.
few weeks can see the performance." And so we've match made you with this, documentary filmmaker who you've never met, who's going to come record your performance. And I said, wonderful, great. And so I met him like the day before or something like that. And he said, great, well, I'm going to be recording your, immersive poem from 7 cameras at 7 angles. And,
Wow.
he had this.
There's that number 7.
Oh, there you go. Exactly. So anyway, he's like, and then the day of, he made
Wow.
this recording of it, and then he called me a few days later and said, I'm editing it now, but I'm wondering if you will help me with it, because I want it to have the flow of the real thing, and I sort of feel like I need your help because it's all part of timing. So anyway, I worked together with him a little bit, and he cut together this short film that was essentially a representation of that immersive poem. And, about a couple of weeks later, and he was a documentary filmmaker who had been based in New York but had recently moved to LA, and he started reading Manly Hall in his early teens and was just a huge Manly Hall fan. And when he moved to LA, he heard that the PRS was here, and he's like, man, I've been reading Manly Hall my whole life. And anyway, so that's how, and this all happened kind of right before my performance. So this is another PRS miracle.
Nice.
So anyway, a couple weeks after cutting that short film, he said, actually, now that I sort of cut this together, I would actually be interested in essentially documenting all of your work for the period of 9 months or a year, and making a feature rather than this short. And would you be open to that? And I said yes.
Great.
And so, and anyway, his name is Courtney Sell, and so he documented my immersive works over the course of 9 months to a year, and then he cut together a feature. Well, it just so happened that before the first event that he came to document, I had essentially transitioned into the place that I'm in now, where most of my work is about peace. And so
Beautiful.
I was premiering all of these immersive poems that were about peace building by way of community. And that ended up being essentially the 9 months or a year that he documented was also a year in which all of my work was about peace. And so he ends up at the end of it with this documentary about these peace building immersive poems. And then he cut it together, and he submitted it to film festivals. So it did film festivals in 2020, and now it got picked up by a distributor, and it comes out in May of 2021. So it's his movie, and it's his vision, and it's his, very much, his filmmaking. But anyway,
sure.
There it is. That's what it is.
Congratulations to Courtney, you said? Yes, Courtney?
Yeah, Courtney
Yeah,
Sell.
congratulations to Courtney Sell. Sounds like an amazing project, and for also being able to be so creative in the pandemic, that is something worth celebrating in and of itself. And that he created this documentary, he or she, or I don't know.
He, yeah.
He, yeah. And also, it's not easy getting something distributed. So that's wonderful. Definitely pass on our congratulations. And to you, not only is it's great that to have this your work documented, but this particular period in time that we've been talking about, where you kind of got, started to see this intertwining or this sharpening of the exploration of peace in relation to your work as an artist, and obviously infused with the power of language in your poetry. It's beautiful. It's almost. I mean, you did say it was a miracle, but it's complete synchronicity. To far as if they're gonna document a period of your work, this would be an incredible one to do because of what you've been talking about. So that's really profound. Congratulations to both of you. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, my experience with the PRS has been an experience of miracle following miracle following miracle. And what I have required for the work in general and the piecework in particular, essentially already being there at the moment that I realize, oh, I guess it's time to share this piecework. Oh, well,
Yeah.
look, I've, so it's been, I'm so, there aren't words to express how grateful I am to the PRS and for the PRS, and also James, to and for you for this beautiful conversation. I feel so honored to have shared it with you.
Well, I want to thank you. I mean, it's getting late here in Izmir, and but we're gonna have to end it. But I want to thank you for spending so much time with me today, and to share it and being a part of this conversation. Hopefully, I'll be seeing you in LA not too long. Something hopefully this year. Please let it be this year. That we can all start to get together. But thank you for spending so much time with me, with us, with everyone who's tuning in. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do subscribe to the PRS YouTube channel. There's a lot of great playlists, a lot of back content, goes back years. Dr. Salyer's President class series, some great events, art openings. I really encourage people to check that out. And also visit prs.org to sign up for Mandy's Peace class. It's ongoing. You can jump in anytime. And also to check out the calendar of other events and classes that are opening. Visit the bookstore to support PRS, and also if you'd like to make a donation. And since I'm from Turkey, I have a little gift for you. I hope you like it. But I'm on lockdown, sort of. And so as often I do, I pulled Rumi off the shelf. And Rumi is one of those poets that you can never get through the whole book because it's too much. You just read one poem and you have to go think about it for a week. But he's from not this part of Turkey, but from Turkey, and so I thought I'd leave with just a short 4-line poem with from Rumi as a gift. And thank you for your time. Good luck with the Peace class and all your work, and please keep everyone up to date. I'd love to have you. Maybe we could talk again once the documentary comes out. That would be really cool. So
wonderful. I would love that. And thank you so, so, so much.
Yeah. And say hi to everyone at if you ever get by PRS and that city of angels that I miss and love so much, especially in your neighborhood. So here's a 4-line poem from Rumi, and then we'll close. Some nights stay up till dawn, as the moon sometimes does for the sun. Be a full bucket pulled up the dark way of a well, then lifted out into light.
Beautiful, gorgeous. What a beautiful way to close. Thank you so much.
Rumi's something else. Yeah. So take care, be safe. Thank you for the conversation, and I hope to see you soon.
Ditto. Until soon.